Valerie Jack is a distinguished author and thinker in the secular and humanist community, celebrated for her insightful exploration of morality from a non-religious perspective. Her groundbreaking work, Living with Death Without God, provides a profound look into how atheists confront and find meaning in the face of death, offering solace and an understanding to non-religious individuals navigating the universal experience of morality. Valerie Jack, thank you so much for joining us on Humanism Now.
Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction, and thanks for the invitation to come on the podcast.
It's our pleasure. So, as mentioned, your book, Living with Death Without God, addresses a deeply personal journey into understanding death from a secular viewpoint. What inspired you to embark on this exploration and share the insights with others?
Well, it's really emerged from my own death anxiety, which is something that's been with me my whole life, really, as far back as I can remember. And then alongside that, I've also always been non-religious. And those two facts together seem to present me with a problem that I've always felt I needed to somehow solve, because I've never really been okay with the fact that I'm going to die, and so is everyone I love. So it's something that's been with me throughout my life, and I have addressed it kind of obliquely in my writing previously. For example, I've had a fascination with coastal erosion and exploring that really as a metaphor for exploring mortality, and what it means, you know, that life has changed and we're all going over that metaphorical cliff edge at some point. But I guess at some point I felt, well, you know, I should look at this head on and really try to address it. I'm driven by curiosity with how other people think and feel. And I had previously used interviews to inform my writing with my poetry and my playwriting. And I decided to do a non-fiction project and to kind of crowdsource an answer to that question of how do we learn to live with death without God. And so I set off on a quest to find answers to that for myself, and also in the hope that I could share those insights and those experiences with other people who are going through challenging experiences and maybe feeling a bit lost and a bit lonely with that.
Yeah, it is a wonderful exploration and compiles so many personal stories. And I think it's very interesting that there aren't a huge amount of resources available, particularly in the secular space, on this, as we mentioned, what is a universal issue that we all have to grapple with. So in compiling the stories from atheists in dealing with death, did you discover any common themes or coping mechanisms that were particularly striking or unexpected?
Well, I suppose I started from the point of view that generally it's harder to face mortality, to face loss and illness if you don't have a religious faith, because religion promises a happy ending for believers. And lots of people who do have a religious faith do find a sense of comfort, hope and meaning in that when they're going through challenging experiences. So I kind of thought that non-religious people are at a disadvantage. So I guess I was surprised that some of the people I spoke to disagreed with me about that. For example, one father who had lost his only child to T-cell lymphoma when he was only 29, he told me that he felt being non-religious had helped him to cope with that loss, because he didn't have to torture himself asking why me, and he didn't have to feel burdened by a sense that God was punishing his son or punishing him in some way. And instead, he could just say, why not me? Why not us? And make some sense of the experience through understanding that life doesn't always make any kind of larger sense. And there is a randomness to the processes of life and disease and illness. So he felt that he was better able to accept the loss because he was non-religious. And that is also supported by studies into outcomes for non-religious people and religious people in terms of coping with grief. So studies have found that actually religious people have higher rates of psychological distress and higher rates of complicated grief when they're dealing with bereavement. So complicated grief, that's a term that's used when people are still unusually debilitated by bereavement more than 6 months on from the loss. Yes, and so those less favourable outcomes for religious people are associated with some of what I've just mentioned, that people feel angry. People may feel angry at their God, and if they've previously had assumptions that there's a just and benevolent creator protecting them and looking after them, and they may believe that God doesn't give you more than you can cope with, and those kind of beliefs. So then the loss can shatter their entire worldview and really leave people feeling adrift. So that was kind of a new way of thinking that I discovered through my reading and through talking to people about their experiences. So a second thing that I found striking was that non-religious people, well, many non-religious people like to think of themselves as essentially rational and logical people. So something that surprised me in my interviewees was that they sometimes needed to let go of that approach to life and understand that grief isn't always rational, and sometimes you just need to do whatever helps you get through. So one man who'd lost his wife told me that he tended to go and sit on her memorial bench next to where she was buried, and he would make phone calls to his son and kind of catch up on family news. And although he didn't believe that she could hear the conversation, he still found on some level a sense of comfort that she was still involved in those conversations. And then several people spoke to me about writing letters to the person who had died. They don't believe that their loved one is up there hearing or able to read those letters. But it's about the way that when you lose someone, there's a lot of unfinished business, and you can feel weighed down by a sense of undelivered communications. And so there's some comfort and meaning to be found in continuing that connection and communication, even though you don't literally believe that there's anyone on the receiving end of it. So that was something that I found interesting.
Yeah, it sounds as though almost any idea of a prescriptive way in which people should deal with grief is disabilitating, is negative. You know, both for religious and non-religious people, if you're prescribed this is how you should react, this is how you should feel, people aren't going to be allowed properly to grieve, and it seems like a deeply personal experience and completely individual. So I can see. I mean, one thing I've heard for people who follow a specific belief structure and have very defined ideas about what happens when you die, is that they kind of don't get the opportunity to properly grieve if they think the person is goes on some other way. So it sounds like for anyone, it's about letting go and just allowing yourself that time to express it in the way that works for you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, coming back to this point you mentioned about the existential anxiety and fear of death. I wondered, in the range of responses that you were able to collect, how do you feel atheists or non-belief influences an individual's approach to that existential anxiety and these universal concerns of our mortality?
So in terms of levels of anxiety relating to death, the research shows that it's an inverted U shape, so that people who are very confident in their religious beliefs, they're very confident that God exists, tend to have, as a group, low levels of death anxiety. And on the other end of the scale, people who are very confident that, that's it, lights out, that's a group that has low levels of death anxiety. And then most people are somewhere in the middle, feeling a bit unsure. And when I was looking for participants to speak to, I had a few responses who were kind of at that extreme end of the scale that, they're very sure what it's all about. And so they saw nothing to fear in death. And they were kind of saying, well, what's the problem and why is there a book to be written about this? But I think for most of us, it is a problem. Nearly all living creatures have that inbuilt drive to remain living creatures, to stay alive. And so it's kind of operates on a very basic level. There's lots of secular philosophers that address the fear of death. So, for example, the argument of symmetry, with Lucretius saying that we were totally unbothered by all that time of non-existence before we were born. So based on that, why should there be anything to fear in that period after we die? And similarly, Epicurus saying, where I am, death is not, and where death is, I am not. So approaching it from a logical perspective, we ought not to be afraid of death then, because that's not going to be a part of our experience. And some of the people I spoke to did find quite a lot of comfort in secular philosophy, and that really worked for them. I guess it's worked for me to a lesser extent, and I think it's to do with the fact that death anxiety is a very basic thing and not entirely logical. So Diana Athill, the non-religious memoirist, she said that in relation to secular philosophy that it might not be effective because death anxiety is brewed in the gut and not in the mind. I think that's largely the case for me. And in terms of addressing my own death anxiety, I found the experience of talking to people and being with people who have faced and are facing very difficult things. I found that more of a comfort, and that sense of connection and belonging to a wider human community who are, in some sense, all facing the same kind of challenges.
Yes, I can see that connecting on the fear and the universal nature of that this is coming for all of us is a good way to deal with it. And I do find those logical, philosophical takes, yes, they're very rational, but this is something which, as you say, rational and reason kind of go out of the window, really, when we're trying to... It doesn't offer any comfort when considering that it's coming for all of us. The concept of legacy is significant across belief systems. How do non-believers you've encountered conceive of their legacy and the idea of immortality without an afterlife?
Yeah, so I think for most non-religious people, the idea of some symbolic form of immortality is still compelling and feels important. So for lots of people, of course, they find that genetically through children and grandchildren. And for many people, they find a satisfaction in the thought that they've contributed through their work life and maybe through volunteering, through being part of causes they believe in. Many people find a sense of being part of something bigger than themselves through a connection to the natural world. But obviously there are limits. And if you don't believe in an eternal life, in in heaven or some other realm, then you need to accept that we're not truly immortal and we will all be forgotten, and everything will all come to an end. Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, he said that the essential problem for human beings is that we have two conflicting impulses, that we want to stand out as individuals and have a kind of permanent meaning, but then on the other hand, we also want to merge and belong to all of creation. And he said that that's a conflict that can't be solved. But I think maybe it can to some extent, and that both can be true, that you can stand out as an individual, but also that you can accept that you're a small part of humanity and creation, and you can I think you can balance those two ideas and come to a place of acceptance with that. So with the concept of rippling, we can find comfort in the idea that our actions can influence the world in a positive way, and that our lives do touch the lives of others, and we will be remembered, but also that ultimately we're not immortal, and we can be okay with that. So just kind of having a sense of proportionate legacy, I suppose, and be okay with the idea that we're a part of the world and we can merge back into that and be okay with that.
No, it's so true. Yeah. Being comfortable with the idea that we're an intermediate step in kind of the history of humanity, I think I find a lot of meaning in that personally. And I had it explained to me, it's like in time travel stories, people will often talk about, if you go back in time and you change one thing, how different the world would be. And it's a good exercise to think that that's happening in the present all the time. Your actions now, you don't know what ripple effects they will have in the future, and if you influence one or two people, and if you put out, as I think we advocate for, kindness, compassion and curiosity, hopefully that has a ripple effect forward through time. So being part of that, I think you can find a greater meaning. So it's very reassuring, certainly. And reflecting on the narratives and insights from conducting the interviews and what you've expressed in your works, how have your own perspectives on death, meaning, and the human experience evolved through compiling the book?
Well, through the project, I came to understand a bit more about how our brains work, and that our brains do have a negativity bias, which is there to protect us from threats, so that we notice the predator on the savannah that's coming for us in terms of our ancestors, or that we notice that there's a speeding car that's just come around the bend. It's important that we notice that before we take in the beautiful view. But I've also come to understand that for our mental health, that negativity bias can be very problematic, and that we can train ourselves to flip that view. So for most of my life, I've had this strong feeling, isn't life sad? Isn't it sad that we all have to die? And through the reading that I've done, and also the many conversations I've had with people for this project, I've got a bit better at flipping that round, and thinking, isn't it lucky that we get to be alive? And having a sense of gratitude for that experience, and understanding just how long the odds were of that being the case. So there's a Snoopy cartoon that I came across during the course of the project, where Charlie Brown says, "One day, Snoopy, we will all die," and Snoopy replies, "Yes, but on all the other days we won't." And that's a better way to think, I think.
Yeah, embrace the day for sure. Valerie, thank you so much for your time, it's a pleasure to mention that you'll be presenting a speech for us at Central London Humanists very soon, going more in detail on these topics and your findings from researching living with death without God. If our listeners would like to follow you or find out any more about your work, where would be the best place to get in contact?
So I'm on Twitter at Valerie Jack, X, and Instagram and Facebook at Valerie Jack Writes. I hope that people may be interested to read the book. I spoke to more than 70 people for the project, and I'd really love to be able to share their stories more widely, so that the book is available for order from independent bookshops as well as from Waterstones and Amazon and other retailers.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, and we will include links to buy the book and also to socials to get in touch with Valerie. Before we go, our standard closing question, and this could be related to our topics today or something independent. What's something that you've changed your mind on recently?
I'm going to say vegan cheese.
To a positive or away from?
A positive. So I've been vegan for around 7 years. Before I became vegan, I used to enjoy my cheese quite a lot, and it was quite sad for me to give that up. Most supermarket vegan cheeses are not that nice. It can be quite rubbery and a bit weird tasting. But I could say I've changed my mind in that I've discovered vegan cheese can be amazing. I've discovered faux so they make amazing, delicious plant-based cheese. So I treat myself to that occasionally.
Very good. Well, I must say I've tried as well, and I think that's one where you've got an uphill battle convincing people, but I'm glad to hear that you found a brand that works for you. But Valerie Jack, thank you so much for joining us both at Central London Humanists. We very much look forward to the talk, and thank you for being everything you've shared here and joining us on Humanism Now.
Thank you very much for having me.